Chapter 12. Black and White. Unite and Fight. The late 1960s were a time of change for Martin Luther King, too. Although he was always against violence, he began to see that there were many different kinds of violence. King was from the South, and he wanted freedom and equal rights for the blacks of the South. But life for blacks in northern cities was not easy either. Blacks in the North could go to the same schools as whites, but many black children did not finish school. Most northern blacks were poor. Many could not find a job when they left school. Many came from one-parent families and lived in buildings that were old and dirty. It seemed to King that poverty was itself a kind of violence. He began to think about the rights that all people should have. It was true that black people had the vote, true that they could eat in the same restaurants as whites. But it is one thing to be able to eat in a restaurant. It is another thing to have the job that gives you the money to eat there. King believed that a few rich people had too much money and millions of poor people had too little. He wanted an end to poverty, and that meant that someone had to take money from the rich and give it to the poor. It was a strong message, and many people who supported King on civil rights were not sure about it. These new ideas seemed dangerous to many of his supporters. King took his marches and protests to the great northern city of Chicago. He wanted to show America how black people lived in the cities of the North. And he saw that it was not just black people in the big cities who were poor. There was poverty among whites, too. King wanted to unite poor black and poor white people, to bring them together to end poverty. Black and white, unite and fight, he said. He led marches through the streets of Chicago. Just as in the South, the marchers were attacked by the police. Sometimes it was worse than in the South. The marchers were hit with sticks and bottles. Some black leaders did not agree with King. They thought that he should only speak for black people. Why should he speak for poor white people? Poor whites had their own leaders. But King had decided what he wanted to do. He planned to lead a Poor People's March on Washington. And now everyone in America was thinking about a new problem: Vietnam. All through the 1960s, America was at war in Vietnam. Every year, more and more American soldiers were sent to fight in Vietnam. By 1968, more than 500,000 American soldiers were fighting there. Many of these soldiers were black and came from poor families. In the end, more than 58,000 American soldiers died in Vietnam. Vietnam was a terrible war. More than 2 million soldiers from North and South Vietnam were killed. More than 2 million Vietnamese who were not soldiers were killed or hurt. Thousands of villages were destroyed and rice fields were burned. Many Americans were against the war. They thought it was wrong for America to go to war with a small country like Vietnam. King agreed with them. He was worried about what his country was doing. He decided to speak out against the war. Some of his friends told him not to do this. They said the war was not his business. He should only talk about the problems of black people. But on the 4th of April, 1967, King made an important speech about Vietnam. He said he could not be silent about the war anymore. People had said that he should not speak about peace. He should only speak about civil rights. "These people," King said, "do not know me. They do not know the world in which they live." Then he attacked the U.S. government. He said the war on Vietnam was wrong. The burning and the bombing had to stop. The killing of Vietnamese men, women, and children had to stop. "I speak as a child of God and as a brother to the poor. I speak as an American. The Vietnamese, too, are my brothers and sisters. The American government must stop its violence against the Vietnamese people. War is not the answer." Martin Luther King was attacked for this speech. What did he know about Vietnam? Some newspapers said he was supporting the Vietnamese government when American soldiers were fighting and dying. But protests against the war grew. All over America, protesters fought with the police. University students who refused to join the army and fight in Vietnam rioted. At Kent State University, Ohio, 4 white students were shot dead by the National Guard. "Now we know what it feels like to be black," said one white student.